Hello everybody, welcome to this week's Enrichment, and our speaker this week is something of a familiar face to most, if not all of you. It's Candy, who's going to be talking about the German Jewish artist Charlotte Salomon in recognition of Holocaust Memorial Day, which is this week. So it's a really significant and valuable talk to hear about this artist who died sadly in Auschwitz, but before that spent a year in hiding in France, hiding from the Nazis, and in that time produced an extraordinarily large body of work, which we'll see some of, obviously, as Candy speaks. So over to you, Candy.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And firstly, I'd like to say I actually feel extraordinarily privileged to be able to share my knowledge and my understanding of Charlotte Salomon with you. Tomorrow is Holocaust Memorial Day, a day that was founded in 2005 to recognize the German Holocaust and also the Holocaust or genocides that have happened since. It's on the 27th of January because that's the day that Auschwitz was liberated. And therefore it seems very pertinent to talk about someone who died in Auschwitz. Charlotte Salomon was, as Margaret said, a German Jewish young woman who died aged 26 in Auschwitz on the 10th of October 1943, the day she arrived there. The wonderful thing is that the extraordinary body of work that she produced survives, and it survived through a very extraordinary and brilliant salvage, really, by local people, and it was then given to her parents in 1947 because they survived the war. So this is Salomon. On the left is her aged 8, and on the right is her aged 23. So when she's aged 8, she's sitting there on the balcony of her home in Berlin. She was of the upper middle classes. Her father was an oncologist and a surgeon. He had met her mother in the Great War in 1917 when she was nursing. This photograph is taken when she's 8, and I think there are very few photographs of Salomon, but in all of them, she looks directly out at one. And I think that the thing that I want to emphasize as we go through the talk is what an observer she was. Because when she came to write, not write, even though there's a lot in it, but when she came to do her great work, life or theatre, everything was done from memory. She was in self-imposed exile. She had fled Berlin, left in December 1938, the month after Kristallnacht, and she had gone to live in Villefranche-sur-Mer, where her grandparents were living. That was in 1938. She started her work 2 years later, and everything was done from memory. which I think is, well, you can judge after you've seen. She's 8, which means we don't know the date of the photograph, but it was either just before her mother died or just after. It was definitely the year her mother died. On the right, you see her in the garden in the south of France. You can see in the background there's a house, and the house is called L'Hermitage. It's owned, or it was owned, by an American woman, Ottilie Moore, and Ottilie Moore was a fantastic woman. She had scores, if not hundreds, of refugees staying there throughout the late 30s and 40s. And this is her garden where Charlotte Salomon is shown painting. And this is the work which I believe is actually one of the great works of the 20th century. It's totally unique. It is, well, she calls it a 3-colored play with music, and she painted 1,300 images. From there, she chose 769. It tells her own story, her history, her family history, the history of what it was to be of the middle classes in Berlin, what the traumas that were part of her life, her family's life. But she tells it with such wit and lightness that you sometimes think that this is extraordinary. This is a woman who has gone through a nervous breakdown, is doing this work because her doctor has advised her that that is the only way she will cure herself. And she goes deep into her memory and starts, she gives, first of all, before I move on to it, she not only does the paintings, she also does these overlays, 340 of them. We think there are only 340 because she ran out of tracing paper. But on the overlays, she has lots of writing and commentary. She has a musical score that runs through the whole of the story. And she gives the characters of her story a name. The cast are, she becomes Charlotte Khan, her father Albert Khan, her grandparents, etc. Her stepmother, Paulinka Bim Bam, instead of Paula Limburg, and the great love that over half the paintings are of Amadeus Dabadon, who was really Alfred. She starts here. She starts in 1913, 4 years before she's born. And she starts with the death of her aunt. Her aunt, who was 18, who drowned herself. In fact, Salomon didn't find this out until until 1940. 17%. Sorry? Okay. So she didn't find this out until 1940, and in 1940 she found out about her aunt's death, her mother's suicide, her grandmother had just committed suicide. So this was one of the things that ignited her necessity to paint her story. But it's quite instructive, this, because if you look at it, we have her drowning at the top. We then have Has somebody got their voice on there? Could you mute, do you think?
Yes, I've just tried. I've put that up in the chat, Sandy. I hope people can see it.
It's much better if so, because then you can hear me and I can hear what I'm saying. But so anyway, we start with this, and it's somewhere, I suppose I see this work as a link somewhere between medieval miniatures, all the writing on there, and a modern graphic novel. The colors show the power of the feeling. As we can see here, these beautiful little episodic scenes. So you have her parents' marriage, and you have her mother in front of the mirror where her veil is being straightened. And then you have her walking in with all the candles behind her. On the next one, you have this episodic scene of the birth, the mother giving birth in bed, and then being the nurse handing the baby to the mother holding the baby, and then taking it for a walk with the nurse. And the next one, with them going on holiday to Bavaria. So I think what is so striking, what I find so striking, is the use of color. It's almost like the color itself tells us exactly her mood. Now, I said at the beginning, we have these overlays, and this, I think, is one of the most beautiful of the paintings, with Francisca, the Charlotte's mother, in bed with her, telling her a story of how she, when she dies, is going to send a letter back down to earth to say what it's like up in heaven. Whenever one sees the red in Salomon's paintings, that sort of points to death. And even though this is an incredibly beautiful high-key painting, this is really looking forward to her mother killing herself. The overlay was done on tracing paper. In the middle, you can see the overlay on its own. And all the writing that's within it. And then the overlay would be put on top of the painting. So you have these layers of meaning which here have the painting itself, the words, and she's orchestrated it with music. So as I say, this looks forward to her mother committing suicide. So as I said at the beginning, Salomon didn't know about her mother or her aunt having killed themselves until 1940. But I think I wanted to put these two together to really emphasize how she shows her feelings, the story, the expression through the use of color. So where we have her 18-year-old aunt, it's really tragic, deep colors, very hectic use of all these people running along this very hectic scene, and you can just see right in the foreground the red, the dead aunt. Okay, so that's a tragic scene. She's 18, she's killed herself. Whereas on the right, which is Salomon's mother, Francisca, we have the open window. Yes, we have the red, which is, if you like, the death. Her mother throws herself out of the window. But it seems like a leap to freedom. We have this beautiful blue in the distance, and the room itself does not seem oppressive. So that's, I think, very interesting how differently she deals with such an extreme thing like suicide. So her mother commits suicide when she's 8. Her father is a very hard-working surgeon, and he can't cope with her on his own. And so she goes to her grandparents. And for 4 years, as we'll come back to later, a rather dreadful 4 years, she remains with her grandparents until her father remarries. And he remarries a wonderful, vivacious, brilliant, beautiful opera singer. And this opera singer takes over the household. She brings Charlotte back. She treats her as her own daughter. And for the first time, they become practicing Jews. Before that, they weren't. They would celebrate Christmas. There's a little note on one of the pictures where Charlotte says, "But I never knew I was Jewish." So Charlotte brings this to the household, and it becomes this wonderful, warm center of culture. And for the next 3 years, because now we're up to 1930, they marry in 1930, and for 3 years, Charlotte has a charmed life. And we see that in the paintings. The colors are bright, they're luminous. On the left, we see the success of Paula. She calls her Paulinka in her manuscript. And there she is publicly being applauded in an opera. And on the right, even more interesting, I think, we see her at home. And the household became an epicenter of culture. There were musical evenings. They entertained the really cultured, literary and scientific. We know Einstein would go to these evenings, and it was a time when really, I believe that Charlotte Salomon sat and listened. That's the only way I can understand how, all those years later, when she's in solitary confinement, really, in that hotel room, they're painting away that she has allusions to Nietzsche, to Kant, to the great thinkers. She uses specific musical moments from Schubert, from Mozart, from Bach. These are all in her memory. So that little girl who was looking quizzically out at us, I think, was absorbing in those 3 years. I say 3 years because in 1933, we have the Nazis taking over. And there is very little political, actively political, in these 769 images. 4, in fact, only 4 that she painted, but these are 2 of them. And we have the date on one with the Nazi ascension. And then on the right, we have that placard. Again, she didn't have anything to copy from. I have to keep reminding myself there was no internet, there were no encyclopedias. This was from her memory. This was her leap into imagination to write these things. But you look at it, or I look at it, and this is 8 years before she paints it. Charlotte Salomon has gone through horrendous things. Her father has been in Sachsenhausen, the concentration camp. She, we think, spent 10 days in Gurs in the camp there. She's had to flee Berlin. And yet there's something light and almost caricature in the way that she paints those Nazis. They're faceless and they're a bit like puppets. So it's there's nothing particularly in these paintings that shows what has happened politically and caused her pain politically. She has been educated up until 1935 at a gymnasium, a very good academic school, but left because she was bullied for being Jewish. She's accepted into the Berlin Academy. The Berlin Academy was on a par with the Bauhaus. Some people, some writers say it was better than the Bauhaus. So it was a really important art academy. And she was the only Jewish person to be accepted. She spent quite a long time there, 3 years. And during that time, she anonymously entered for the prize there and won. When they found out she was Jewish, they took it from her and gave it to her best friend, actually. But by the summer of 1938, they said she couldn't continue there because of her religion. However, it is interesting, it is great to note that one of the professors there, you know, obviously not Jewish, but he kept the art academy open at night so she could go there at night and work. Obviously not with a model as she has here, but I think she was even at that point thought of as someone with exceptional talent. So she leaves in 1938 in the summer, but what has really been her center of interest was this man. Over half the paintings are dedicated to him. He might not look a particularly charismatic figure, but he obviously was. Charlotte fell very much in love with him. Her stepmother had a flirtation with him, and he fell in love with the stepmother. He was also engaged at the time, so he was certainly someone who had a way with the ladies. But he was a very interesting man because he had been wounded in the Great War, and very badly wounded. And he believed that in order to become a great artist, you had to really suffer. You had to go through near death to then come out the other side and to be able to be reborn. And he doesn't die until 1960. He fled in the war to London. And he wrote quite a lot about this. But it is interesting that, again, this seems to have been a spur to Salomon when she comes to create her great work. She paints him again and again and again. There are hundreds of images of him, sheets devoted entirely to his head. A little episodic series of paintings showing their relationship, whether it's kissing, whether it's holding onto each other on a park bench, which rather poignantly on the transparency above it. It has the bench, has Aryans only, Jews weren't allowed on the bench, so there they were in secret. They had to be in secret anyway, because Paula was so jealous. Paulinka was so jealous. And so all their relationship is held in secrecy. This lovely painting of them after swimming. And then if you look at the use of paint in the final one, the drama of it, the intensity of it, you can almost feel her passion erupting. And then we have in 1938, the Night of the Broken Glass, the Kristallnacht. And here we have the other two paintings which specifically refer to the events in Berlin. And on the right-hand side, she paints as if it's from a newspaper, the history and the response of the authorities. On the left-hand side, we have the actual smashing up of the Jewish shops and synagogues. The effect was immediate on the Salomon family. Her father, who had not been allowed to practice in the National Hospital since 1933, but had been working in the Jewish hospital, was taken and was put in the concentration camp in Sachsenhausen, which is about, I don't know, about an hour or so from Berlin. He was held for about 6 weeks. He was only got out because Paulinka was relentless. She used her beauty, her charms, her haranguing to convince the authorities to let him go. But it was a shocking time for anyone who was Jewish. And Charlotte's grandparents in 1933 had moved to the south of France. And so Charlotte was put on a train, given false papers to go to the south of France in December 1938. Now, she thought that this was purely because Paulinka wanted her out of the way so she could carry on with Amadeus. Or that's what we have in her paintings and in her writings. However, she arrived in the south of France, in Villefranche-sur-Mer, near Nice, and I love this. I think you can just see the joy of someone having escaped from all that Nazi oppression and hideous situation in Berlin and arriving in the south of France. So she shows herself again and again, painting, drawing in her swimsuit, and the colors are high key. I feel that she must have looked at Matisse. There's a real beauty of the flat shapes and the linearity. But again, I emphasize this was all in her head. She had no reference points at this time. So going to the south of France to stay with her grandparents was escape from the Nazis, but as she wrote in her book, in her manuscript, it wasn't Herr Hitler I was escaping from, it was you, Grandpa. And she had, we believe, from her paintings, from her writings, she had been abused by her grandfather from a very young age. The painting on the right-hand side, which occurs quite early in the cycle, shows her in a bathroom, sitting on the bath, and the overlay says, "And this is what they call love." There are other references throughout the book. I call it a book, throughout the manuscript, I'll call it, which refer to these possibilities. And the drawing on the left, she pertained to have done as he lay dying. So, and we'll come to his death a bit later. It's a tremendous drawing, in pen and ink, but she drew him, she said in the postscript to the book, as he lay dying. There he is on the right-hand side, and it's very explicit what is written in these and many other of the final paintings of the book. The grandfather told Charlotte about the mother and the aunt's suicide when his own wife had tried to commit suicide. She hadn't, she'd tried to hang herself and she'd been cut down, and he said, "Well, look, you might as well kill yourself, Charlotte. Everybody else has." And she took her to the window, as she puts in her manuscript, and he said, "Jump, jump," like all the others had. The grandmother then does, a few weeks later, manage to kill herself. She throws herself out of the window. That same night, the grandfather wants to move Charlotte into his bed for her to take the place of his wife. She, surprisingly enough, has a sort of nervous breakdown response to this. She sees her doctor, a doctor who becomes very important in the history of the manuscript, Dr. Meredith, and he says, what you need to do is to really go into your life. Remember everything that you can think of. Go as far back as you can, every detail that you can, and paint it. And the wonderful Ottilie Moore, she becomes her savior. She rents her a room in a hotel in Cap Ferrat, so a little bit away from the grandfather. And she stays there for 15 months, painting and painting and painting and painting. Here is Ottilie Moore. So Ottilie Moore managed to get these children and many others out of France and back to America. In fact, she got all the people who were staying at the house at the time, apart from 2 French children and 2 Belgian children, all the others, she managed to get them passports, and they sailed to New York. And you see them on the left. She's there with a couple on her knee, and on the right, there they are in New York. She left behind the children, and she left behind her lover. And her lover was this man. So Alexander Nagler He was someone who had escaped from the Austrian Greater Germany, and he had found himself in Villefranche, lived in the house, became Ottilie's lover, and also it was in charge of all the children, the orphanage, the education, etc. He couldn't get a passport to go to America, and so he stayed in the house. And when Ottilie left, she asked Charlotte to look after him. She did more than that. She married him. And we have a painting. I love these two paintings because to me they are so different in terms of a relationship with someone. Because the first one is painted in gouache. It's painted in 1939 when they were far from intimate, and it's quite an objective painting, not particularly empathetic. The one on the right is painted when Charlotte and Alexander had become lovers, and possibly she was by that time pregnant. It's I love the two of them because it's different ways of looking at someone, different ways of painting someone. You see his death. He was taken with Charlotte in 1943, and although she died on arrival, he survived until the 1st of January 1944. This is the painting, the final painting to her book. And she puts on it, and from that came the life or the theatre, question mark, question mark, question mark. And people have spent the last 50 years sort of trying to sort of decipher all this. And I mean, for me, what the title means is real life. What's real life? Theatre, the imagination. Both are real, but really her questioning of what happened and what really happened, I guess. They were, the reason why they were taken, I guess, is, there were lots of reasons, but what happened was Charlotte and Alexander realized they were going to have a child. They decided to marry. They decided to marry publicly in the town hall at Nice. They had been living for 4.5 years in complete security in the south of France. So they didn't for one moment think that they would be captured. However, in September of 1943, the Italians changed sides and fought with the, moved over to the Allies' side, and therefore the Nazis went into the south of France. And obviously, whether it was from reading the town hall documents or whether it was because they were informed of, we don't know, but on the 24th of September, they went into L'Hermitage, and they took at 7 o'clock in the evening, and they took the two of them. The children escaped, but they took the two of them, and they were therefore transported. But I forgot to talk about this, which is also very interesting. Which I'll go back to that and then come to this. I'll come to this and then go back to that. 2016, this was released. It's a 16-page document that Charlotte Salomon wrote in paint using different colors, so very carefully constructed, in which she writes a confession to Amadeus. She uses the name, his name from the manuscript, not his real name, but she writes a very detailed confession of how she killed her grandfather. And in it, she writes that she, the grandmother had lots of sleeping tablets, baronial, and she ground them up. She made an omelette. She fed it to the grandfather. While he ate it, lay down, and that's when she did the drawing. And then he went out, collapsed on the street, and died. So it was kept in the family until 2002, even though they had given, in 1971, they gave the manuscript to the Jewish Museum in Amsterdam, but it was kept in the family till then. It was then translated into French in 2012, and it was published in English in 2016. And there are so many different views about this, but it's a very interesting document. We have the transportation document of Charlotte Salomon. She is number 660. She uses her married name, Charlotte Nagler. And interestingly, she puts herself as a graphic artist. I say that's interesting because I think that she gave that as her profession because she knew that would be useful to the Germans if she got to a camp. Why was she killed the moment she got there? Because she was pregnant. And because there was no way that a pregnant woman would be allowed to exist because it was continuing the Jewish race. How did they know? I think they could have known in one of two ways. Either because it was obvious, but she was only 5 months pregnant, so possibly not. But they did on those trains, they would announce that double portions would be given to pregnant women. And someone who had been in a state of starvation or semi-starvation for a bit would jump at it. So maybe that was the reason. When we went on the study trip to Berlin a couple of years ago, one of the things which I hadn't realized were there, these wonderful tiny monuments on the pavement to people. And in 2012, this Stolperstein, I really apologize for my German accent, but it was put in front of the house where she used to live and dedicated to her. So I have spoken for long enough. Any questions anyone would like to ask? I'll turn this off if I can find out how to.
Candy,
can I just get rid of this? Has it stopped sharing?
It says click to exit.
What do I do? Sorry. It says click.
Click to exit.
Oh, there. Hello. Yes, yes.
I don't really have any specific questions, but I really loved the art that she created. Especially I noticed like it's got a kind of lack of linear space. It's got like kind of dynamic arrangements of different objects that wouldn't be possible in real life.
I completely agree. I genuinely think that not just this unique book, because there's never been anything produced like this, but the work itself is so beautiful. I think she should be so much better known.
She should. I can't believe I've not known of her before.
I know, exactly. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have to say that I first saw her work in 1998. I went to the Royal Academy, and knowing nothing about her, and walked in, and just like you, thought, I cannot believe this. I cannot believe these paintings. They're so intense. They're so beautiful, and they're so immediate. I mean, you almost feel you're there with her in her imagination, in her memory, and I have never seen anything like them since. I have seen them a number of times. The Jewish Museum in Amsterdam is possibly the most welcoming museum I've ever been to. I was able in 2006 to go into the archives there and to handle the unframed one. They were in boxes, and I was allowed to take them out, to look at them, I mean, I have written a great deal about her. I have felt that every year that goes by, I think, oh yes, I know what Charlotte Salomon's like. Every year I find out more things. I think she's, as I say, I feel very privileged to be able to talk to you about her.
Thank you very much for sharing about her. I've really enjoyed learning about her.
Yeah, good. I'm glad.
Can you see the questions that are coming up in the chat? There's one from Harry in which he asks,
okay,
what mediums did she use and how did she access them when she was in hiding?
Very good questions. She used, in the main, gouache. And gouache is quite similar to watercolor. It's got the same, properties, but it's thicker and more opaque. So it covers the painting, the picture. She did, like the last one of the man who she married, was in watercolor, but nearly everything else was in gouache. The book, let me tell you how we've got it, is that in September, when the Nazis took over the south of France, Charlotte and her husband realized they had to get the work out. And they wrapped it up in 3 separate parcels. She went through very carefully and put it in order, her life story, the 769 that she wanted in sequence. The next lot were the ones that she had decided not to put in the story. And the third was that confession. She wrapped them up in brown paper, and on the outside they wrote the name Ottilie, property of Mrs. Ottilie Moore. And they took them, she was now in America, but they took them to the doctor, Dr. Meredith, and he hid them. In 1947, Charlotte's parents, who had managed to remain, they'd got to Amsterdam, and then when in 1940, in May, when Amsterdam was taken, they went into hiding, but they survived. In fact, her stepmother didn't die until 2000. So she lived to be a very old lady. Ottilie went back from, came back from America in 1947, and she gave the manuscript to Charlotte's parents. How did she get those paints? Well, I imagine through the doctor and through Ottilie Moore. And you know, you paint with the gouache and water, so it's not like using oil paint. It's quite easy, I think. I think if you look very carefully throughout all the works, you see where she's got more of one colour and less of another. And the only reason why people believe that she only did 340 of the transparencies is because they think she ran out of tracing paper. So those are really good questions.
Candy, can I ask, where did you first see her paintings? How did you come across them?
Well, like I say, it was totally by chance in the Royal Academy. And this is something you should all do, you see. I forever have been a member of the Royal Academy. So no matter what comes up, I like to get my money's worth and I go and see the exhibition. And I literally stumbled in and saw these paintings and thought, why do I know nothing about this? Why do I know nothing about this woman and these paintings? And remember, she was 26 when she was murdered. She was, she did so much in that tiny amount of time. And I think that for me, I very often think, you know, you can't say anything, but it is appalling that she died in Auschwitz. But thank God that her pictures survived.
Yes, we have some more questions up here. Juliet is asking, did she write about her work alongside producing it? How do we have information about the meaning behind each piece?
Well, that's a very good question. At the very beginning of the talk, I think maybe I didn't say it clearly enough, but all the paintings are either, or very many of the paintings are either written on directly with that lovely painted writing, or she has overlays and huge amounts of the stories are there. So yes, she wrote about them on the works. I mean, in some ways it's like a novel, in some ways it's like a play, in some ways it's like an opera. It is, as Wagner would say, a total work of art. But also, by the time her work was realized how important it was, there were lots of people who were still alive. So a few art historians or historians painstakingly went and interviewed people who had survived, people who had lived in the same village. So there was a certain amount of firsthand. But one has to, I think, always be very careful with Salomon, because she writes very, or she paints and writes very graphically, for example, about her relationship with the person she calls Amadeus. In fact, one of the paintings that she didn't include had him naked with her straddling him, and the overlay saying, oh, I can see a very good piece of work here. And she obviously thought that was a bit much, so she didn't include it. But we don't know for certain if that relationship ever was consummated, or if it was all in her imagination. We don't know. Certainly, when he was interviewed in the late 50s in London, he was astounded that her great work had, almost, well, half the images relating to him. So therefore, there are two things. One is Charlotte Salomon, the person, and Charlotte Salomon, the person, had a tortuous life, I think, not just because of the political events, but because of her family events. Griselda Pollock, who wrote 2-3 years ago this huge tome, great book, really about her. She basically says that her mother and her aunt had both been abused by their father in the same way that Charlotte by her grandfather, and that's why they'd all killed themselves. He goaded Charlotte to kill herself, and her fight was, as she wrote in it, on one of the overlays, was very much about escaping from him. Okay, what do we got here? What was it initially? Well, I can tell you, Ruby, the colour. I mean, some of you know my preferences in art, and colour is really top of the list. And I think the way that she handles colour to tell stories, to change mood, to that's the thing that really I found fantastic and still do. Was this use of colour unusual? Well, you're an art historian, Juliet. You know, colour was really used very much by Matisse, but then it's and the Fauves and the German expressionists. So she came into contact with all these. It was very much used, but I think that, and I'm not saying she's the only person who does it, but really it's the thing that affected me the most. I don't know, you're all far too young, but there is a program called Desert Island Discs, and at the end they ask what book and what luxury you would take with you. And for many years I have thought, I want to take Charlotte Salomon's life or theatre with me, because you know, to have the time to be able to really scrutinize every painting, every overlay would be a joy. I might have to learn German though, but never mind. Was this use of colour unusual? Yeah. Does gouache? I think you have to use it very purely, and that's a really good question. She only used primary colours. So she didn't ever use black, and so that's how she kept them so pure. Yeah.
Candy, what was the size of the Life and Theatre? And with her confession, it was 16 pages. Was that 16 pages that you turn, or 16 pages that were assembled together? I'm just trying to visualize it. Okay, very, very good question too. So the size of the works were 32.5 by 25 centimeters each. And they were all independent. The confession at the end was on a different sort of paper. It was a rougher paper. This could have been that she'd run out of good paper. We don't know. It's slightly, the pages are slightly larger, and they were 4 pages folded. Okay, so there were 16 pages, but there were 4 pieces. Yeah. Okay, is that clear?
Yes, thank you.
Anything else that anyone wants to ask? Does it make you want to go and see them?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Does it make you want to actually find out more about?
Yeah.
Yeah, good, good.
You know the Suicide Sisters, like the two pictures that you showed us?
Hmm.
The one of the room where it was like like a much more colorful and bright image. Do you think it was all empty to kind of show how she was feeling after the person killed themselves?
Yeah, I do. I think that's
Like a
that's
loss
good.
of something.
Yeah, I think that red on the horizon shows that she's gone. She's thrown herself out of the window. She's dead. But the window itself and the room itself, there is a Friedrich painting, Caspar David Friedrich, which I think she must have looked at, which has a woman with her back to us in front of the window looking out. And the window in the room are very similar, but the woman's gone. And I think that in the part, you know, at some point, whether it was when she was at the Art Academy or whether in her very cultured home, they had a book of Friedrich paintings, I don't know, but it seems so similar, the room, to that I think she must have stored that in her memory and then painted it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
So,
Any more questions, anybody? I have one, Candy. It's just about a term that you used, hikey. Is that
which term?
hikey? Am I mishearing something? It sounded like
Right.
hikey. Hikey colours?
As in like low and high key, like low key and
Yeah.
high key.
Oh, it's
Yeah, so that
hikey.
they're bright. Yeah.
Okay, right, all right.
Yeah.
I'm slightly mishearing. I thought it was a
No, it's fine. I think to go back to her color, you know, she was in this very, very cultured home for you know, from 1930 until 1938. And they would have had books, they would have discussed. And the German artist, writer, philosopher Goethe, his color theory of how you can create mood through color, I personally think she must have been very influenced by, because that's what she seems to do. It's not, you know, the sort of color that French artists use, apart from that one scene in the south of France of her in her swimming suits. But I think the other works is really quite Northern Germanic in the use of expressionist color, and to me very influenced by Goethe's color theories. So
I thought her writing was so interesting, as well as the paintings themselves, because you've got that voice, and that voice is not her as victim, it's her as isolated, with a kind of really strong German kind of slant about anti-Jew, etc. I thought it was a really interesting thing for her in that position to be documenting simultaneously, with this very isolated, like Phoebe said about the perspective, it makes everything seem from a kind of bird's eye view. So it was an incredible combination of those two things that was really moving.
yes, I completely agree. I think that when her work was first discovered in the early 60s, because it was then given to the Jewish Museum. The first exhibition ever was 1961 in Amsterdam. And there were connections with Anne Frank, because in Amsterdam, Charlotte's parents had become sort of friends with Anne Frank's father. And at the beginning, they were put very much alongside each other. The first publication, I think, was in 1963, and it puts them together. And I think it's taken a long time for that to be separated, for exactly what you say, Emmy. She's not a victim. She doesn't paint herself as a victim. I'm not saying Anne Frank was, but she was in a completely different situation. I think Charlotte Salomon's demons were much closer to home, and her family history was far more intense, or as intense as the political and social history.
How did her work like get into the Royal Academy? Like how did it get picked up and like brought up?
Great question. I think that there was a touring exhibition in 1998 and 99. And the director of the Royal Academy at that point was Norman Rosenthal, and he was aware of her work. It, I think, was such a brilliant thing that it was on at the Royal Academy, because it didn't have any, it wasn't, since she's, I think, in some ways been slightly undermined by being put into various categories: feminist art, female artist, Holocaust victim. These are all part of her. But what, when I first saw, was nothing about that. It was about her as a painter. And I think when Norman Rosenthal put on that exhibition, it was the same. And I think it was a fantastic thing that it went to the Royal Academy. You know, because you think of the Royal Academy as being slightly staid and, you know, all the things you think about, but no, they have some extraordinary exhibitions.
Yeah, that's really good that people actually, because she could have easily just been forgotten about.
She was dead by the time that it was her grandfather who, in that, I'm reading something from the chat, she confesses to the killing of her grandfather. And that really only came to light however many years, over 50 years after her death. Griselda Pollock, who I think is really the leading expert on Salomon, she doesn't believe it. She believes that Salomon wanted to kill him, but didn't kill him. And it's this confusion of memory, or as it's called, life or theatre. So then there are art historians who think it did happen, but we don't know. We don't know at all. He was picked up when he collapsed on the street. So perhaps she had given him the omelette with the drugs in, and he collapsed on the street because of them. Or maybe he just collapsed on the street. Who knows? But he was picked up by the authorities, and German authorities, who were very meticulous, who recorded his death as having had a heart attack. Her youth work. Yeah, I agree with you, Juliet, completely. I think her colour is so staggering that even though there are, awful events and things like this, you almost do a double take, don't you? And you think about them far more, I think, or I think about them far more. Yeah.
Well, that was fantastic, Candy. Thank you very much. I think.
Well, it was
Thank you very much.
We really enjoyed it. Very, very interesting.
Thank you, Candy.
Thank you so much. It was so
Cheers.
informative. I'm
Ah.
so happy that, like, obviously I know that you were very happy that you were able to find out about it from the museum, but obviously we're very happy that we get to find out about it from you, because obviously it's very I wish I could go back in time and see the showing that you saw, because obviously there's always a different show and way that people tell it, and I just think that the way that you informed us about it was absolutely lovely. Thank you, Candy.
Oh, thank you, Stella. Yeah, well, I feel that an extra 30-40 people now know about her, so I'm delighted. So
Yeah,
thank you.
You're an
very much.
amazing speaker.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, thank you. I'll see you.
I hope to see you all physically very soon. So anyway, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.